So theoretically, Hong Kong could reorganize their government and they could do it all officially within Hong Kong law, but China could come over and be like, no, we actually supersede you, so undo this shit, basically, right?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, what's up?
Not much, just enjoying the last little bit of the weekend. So you wanted to talk about Hong Kong and Bolivia, right?
You wanted to talk about Hong Kong and Bolivia, right?
Well, wait.
Wait,
I I saw the REM debate. It was very unproductive. And then I threw out some topics, Rojava, Hong Kong, Bolivia.
hmm
And you said Hong Kong and Bolivia were the two areas that most people could enjoy, right?
Oh, sure, yeah, go for it. What do you got?
Okay, so we should probably start with Hong Kong since that has the most recent updates with the elections that just occurred.
Uh-huh. Oh, real quick, do you want to introduce yourself and give, like, your background and everything?
Oh, sure. My name's Dylan Burns. I'm the foreign policy advisor to Michaela Wilkes and Senator Jill Carter. I'm also do some work with 21st Century Democrats and trying to get, Democrats elected swing states since we're trying to take back the Senate, and just do a lot. The rest of it's just local Maryland election work.
Okay.
Okay, so how much do you know about Hong Kong? How much do I need to fill you in on?
Not much. I know that Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, that they kind of operate semi-autonomously, and that in 2040 or something, they're supposed to go back to China, I think, and that recently their parliament has had some laws that people thought were China exerting too much influence over them, so they're like protesting and all that shit, like broadly, basically.
Sure. Okay. So I'll just start with the extradition bill.
Mm-hmm.
So for a while, there's been a lot of tension between the pro democracy faction and the pro like mainland China faction about the extent of democracy and about whether the special administrative region is just like a new version of colonialism, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of this like came up to like heat during the umbrella movement, which happened in 2012, that had to do with the type of education kids would be getting because the CCP wanted to push a type of patriotic education that would rewrite the history on some things like what happened with Tibet and what happened with specifically with things like Tiananmen Square.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big resistance, but that was quite quickly cracked down upon.
Wait, real
This
quick, just
time,
so, I'm sorry, just so I follow this. So the umbrella movement was a resistance to that, like the new education, basically.
that was most of these movements, they start with a specific thing, but it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's never like it's not just one thing. It usually isn't just one thing that starts these mass movements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the recent thing is with the extradition bill, but it wasn't just the extradition bill. If it was just that, you weren't able to get millions of people in the city, like 20 to 30% of the city's residents on the street. That's next to impossible.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why is because it was just the slow like destruction of like civil rights, civil protections, democracy in Hong Kong, and it's more like the last straw, like the last thing, and that's also why the government was unprepared for the backlash.
Mm-hmm.
The extradition bill was basically the idea that you could take people charged with crimes in Hong Kong and send them to the mainland and other places around the world,
Mm-hmm.
but the main concern was the mainland. And because people were very concerned that they would take political prisoners and people of that sort, bring them to China, and they would disappear, which has actually happened quite recently with a lot of protesters in certain areas that are technically China. And like it's weird. It's in a weird agreement where they're actually like a train station that arrives in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
In that specific train station, it's technically China. So people arriving in Hong Kong, if they're a little, the government doesn't like them, they'll just make them disappear.
Sure.
So they're very scared of that, like, kind of like extending to the entirety of Hong Kong. Definitely with the disappearance of like certain like booksellers who sold controversial books.
Mm-hmm.
So Joshua Wong and some other people who last time who were arrested during the Umbrella Movement, this time took like a backseat and a different approach because they learned a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and they let it more be a more organic, leaderless type of movement. So the government couldn't really crack down on it and didn't really have a good response. And by the time they finally did withdraw the bill, it was too late. There was already too much resistance. The demands have extended to what they call five demands:
Mm-hmm.
universal suffrage, um, reclassifying the protesters from rioters to just protesters, because if you get charged with rioting, the sentencing is a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Charging certain police officers with abuse, having an independent commission to investigate police officers,
Mm-hmm.
and the big one, there was also the withdrawal of the bill, which already occurred, and the enactment of universal suffrage.
Sure. When you say universal suffrage, are there like people that aren't able to vote right now, or what does that mean? What does that more specifically refer to?
Well, they're saying Hong Kong's a democracy is kind of a weird statement because only 50% of Hong Kong's elected officials
Mm-hmm.
are actually elected by the people. The rest of them are appointed by companies and and like chosen people like who choose who like nominate and pick who's going to actually be the position. Specifically, the chief executive as well, who's goes by the name of Carrie Lam at the moment.
And in order for Hong Kong to make a change to the structure of its government, they would need to appeal to China for that. They can't do that on their own.
Well, this is I would say you would have to change the basic law, which is the Constitution of Hong Kong. But recently, there was a very strange case where and this actually scares me quite a lot because recently there was Hong Kong protesters have been wearing masks because they're scared of the Chinese government getting a reading on their face and charging them later with being part of the protests. And they actually were there was a mask ban that was ruled unconstitutional by a Hong Kong court, but then the Central Party in Beijing just overruled it and says China's law is goes over local Hong Kong law. So at this point, I'm actually unsure of how they would be able to do something from like a Hong Kong legislative perspective, considering China could just at any point be like, nope, your law means nothing.
So theoretically, Hong Kong could reorganize their government and they could do it all officially within Hong Kong law, but China could come over and be like, no, we actually supersede you, so undo this shit, basically, right?
Yeah, and while I don't even know if that's completely legal at all, but I mean, that doesn't really matter. They have the guns and tanks.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So at this point, recently, there was there's been a lot of clashes. I'm sure you saw the footage of Hong Kong protesters fighting the police and going back and forth. And Carrie Lam and the CCP have thought for a very long time that the public of Hong Kong, the majority of Hong Kongers, actually do not support the protests. That this is a radical young movement and that the elderly and other sectors of society just want to go about their daily lives and they actually all support the party. And recently, everybody was looking to local elections as kind of like a referendum on
see where they
Hong
actually
Kong.
stand on these issues. Huh?
Yeah, and that's why turnout was as high as ever for these local elections. I mean, these are the type of elections that you like. How do you get rid of trash? Where does the light post go? Nothing that really controls the top sectors of society. So nothing that really actually addresses the issues that the Hong Kongers are fighting for right now. The only thing you could say about this is I believe 10% of the people who like choose the chief executive actually come from these local positions. And most of these local positions before were actually held by pro-CCP people.
Okay.
It was a complete landslide. Like I think 17 out of the 18 county, what we would call like counties, actually went to pro-democracy people. It was a complete landslide, a complete flipping of the table. The Central Party was so surprised and was like so expecting a victory on this. They actually had pre-written stories to actually celebrate what they thought was going to be their victory. And so now they're kind of scrambling, trying to figure out what to go from here, because now they've like kind of had to realize that, well, the people on the ground don't actually support the CCP. Well, they've made the wrong choice. So how do we deal with that? So now we're at a point where the protesters are more invigorated than ever because they've basically just been given like a statement from the people like, we support you, keep doing what you're doing. The protesters now can have a little bit more legislative power when it comes to the picking of the chief executive, and it was a huge victory on the side of the protesters. What I expected after this was for the police to maybe like soften a little bit to try to like build community relations. But because Xi Jinping sees Hong Kong's
Wait,
kind
real
of
quick,
like,
can we clarify? So when we say police here, how do the police in Hong Kong function? Are these police under the employ of like the CCCP, or are these like Hong Kong police that are local Hong Kong police? Like, what does that mean? Like, for instance, like in the U.S., like if I live in California, I have California State Police, I've got LAPD, Los Angeles Police, and then I have like FBI, like federal agents, right? And I would view these agencies as being quite separate from one another. Is it similar in Hong Kong, or how does that work?
this is actually something that is actually under a lot of heated debate, because there's something in the basic law that talks about the ability for the Chinese government to actually send in troops to like quell and bring order, right? And in it says there has to be that the local government basically lost control. There's some contradiction in it, like a lot of legal documents that are like that they want to be able to just kind of like go over at any point. But the basic idea is that if the police cannot control, then the government can send in troops, which basically signifies that these are like local Hong Kong police force.
Okay.
But the military, at any point, using that justification, could kind of move in, and that's also why the protesters have been very careful not to like take control of territory, because that could be a show of
that could
the local government.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I've seen a lot of like criticisms from like a lot of tanky folks about like if this was really like people's protests, why haven't they taken over land?
Hmm.
was because they didn't want to be run over by tanks.
Gotcha. Well, it's not like a lot of tankies would say that's never really happened before anyway, but that's
Uh,
a whole other discussion. Um,
I would actually like to comment on that if I can.
oh yeah, go for it. I see like a lot of people say that like for instance like Tiananmen Square and all of that is actually like super overblown and it wasn't really that big of a deal. I've seen
Um,
tanky people say, yeah, go ahead.
when I deal with like, for instance, I just did like a very very large thread on Twitter, and like I'm writing a report for the campaigns
Hmm.
about what happens with Chinese concentration camps holding Uyghurs
All
in
the Uyghur
China.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I mean most of my work is based on like human rights stuff and like dealing with that. And I'm like truly horrified by what's going on.
Yeah.
What I'm more horrified by is that the most of the opposition I've gotten
Hmm.
on these issues have been from like these tanky type peoples, and they've
Yeah.
actually in real life have actually like undermined my work at times on this issue.
Like how? I'm super curious about that. Because my understanding with
I can't give names
oh yeah,
obviously.
no, yeah, of course. My understanding, the reason why I ask is my understanding is that most of these people seem to exist like very squarely, like in online spaces. That like for instance, like if we look to Twitter, you know, Bernie has like 95% support in the Democratic Party, but then when we look to like broader polls, it's clearly not the case. Do these people actually like come out in real life and try to fuck with shit or?
I know at least one person who, when I was talking about, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with like Chinese neocolonialism in nations like Zimbabwe when they were like working with Mugabe, who's like was a really brutal dictator who committed a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what they were kind of taken aback and like talked about like, well, America's done a lot worse, and I'm like, well, America has done some pretty bad stuff too, but we can't just ignore this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, but China's doing all this like stuff with the Belt and Road, and before we were actually talking about him like trying to get me a job at like a local think tank. Well, not a local, it's in DC, but a think tank in DC.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't heard back since. So actually a really good opportunity for my career was actually undermined by my like standing like saying like, no, these are concentration camps. I'm not cool with this like neocolonialism stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We need to stand up to it. So it has affected my career, and these people have seeped in a little bit to the foreign policy discussion in America.
Hmm. Okay, interesting.
So when it comes to right now, I would say that the protests are at they're probably at their like best position since the beginning of the protests. Um, a lot of the CCP's argument for a
Wait,
while
holy
was
shit! You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. You're not allowed to say which think tank, right?
what? Oh, no, I don't want to comment.
Okay, because that might be really relevant to the Bolivia stuff, but maybe not. Okay, so I keep going.
Well, I will say that I was told that it had something to do with like Hugo Chavez, which made me a little uncomfortable, but I still needed a job at the time.
Uh huh. Wait, hold on. I don't want to like publicly say anything. I just I don't even know if these guys are stationed in DC though. That's the only reason I ask though.
The Center for
Okay.
Economic. Oh, you mean no, not the Center for Economic Policy Research.
Okay, gotcha. Because I know that they did like a big review of the OAS stuff and
Let me
everything.
actually check it. That might actually be. I don't. I should probably shut up.
Okay, yeah. No, okay, just curious. Sorry. Okay, Hong Kong stuff. Go. Back to what you were saying.
So what was I saying? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
So people kind of like rewriting history or saying like Tiananmen Square and stuff wasn't a big deal, or like kind of like letting China slide on their shit because apparently America has done bad stuff.
So at this point, I mean, I could go on for hours about like the South China Sea and other stuff, but I'm gonna go back to Hong Kong. I don't want to shift too much off of it.
Mm-hmm.
But Carrie Lam is in a very tough position right now. She's the chief executive. Because of this, she actually has wanted to resign for a while there was actually some leaked audio that came out a while ago of her saying like, I want to resign. The party is not letting me. I feel really bad about what's going on. I want to leave. They will not let me leave because if she leaves, it'll be seen as concession from the party. And
this is in Hong Kong.
yes, this is in Hong Kong.
And this is the party, like the democratically elected people. Like
she was not democratically elected. She was appointed.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
The chief executive is appointed. Only 50% of representatives are elected.
Gotcha. Okay. Can you explain this so that I can understand this? When you say chief executive, do you mean CEOs of actual companies or whatever? Or
No. The chief executive is like basically like I would call like the governor of Hong Kong, I guess is the best way I could put it.
Okay. And those are appointed by like the democratically elected like legislators or
somewhat some of it's appointed by democratically elected, for instance, the 10% from local, but a lot of it's like party officials and I believe even the business sector.
Okay, interesting. I'm sorry, these are like really specific. How does the business sector get like a vote on like how does that work?
I'd have to go back and check.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
But
Yeah, that's just it's really interesting. Like I'm trying to imagine like Amazon or Google like voting, like having special rights to vote for like
yeah,
senators and
it's
shit.
really weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a strange system, but I mean,
Okay.
it was purposefully designed to be kind of like a compromise on democracy. And when you like compromise on democracy, it's never really gonna be
Mm-hmm. People are saying
democracy.
London apparently does similar stuff, but I don't. Okay, cool. All right, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So when it came to like the sheet, we also got some other really good information, which actually makes me very hopeful about the use of force. When it came to Carrie Lam also said that the party has no plans to send in the military, and have only kind of sent in the military semi in a sense once, and it was just to clean up a road, and it was like a division of unarmed soldiers. But those same soldiers with like anti-terror, was an anti-terror unit, I believe, from actually like Xinjiang, which is where
Mm-hmm.
the Uyghur oppression is coming, which that's scary. But it also that indicates that they plan on basically the Central Party plans on waiting this out, and that over time people would get dissatisfied, and that's what they were hoping for with this election. Problem is it failed. So now they're in a tough spot where they don't know if waiting this out it'll just get worse for them. They'll
Mm-hmm.
lose even more support, and then when the elections in about 1 year happen that actually matter when it comes to like picking future policy for Hong Kong, that they might even lose in more disastrous fashion. So I would say the CCP is in a very tough spot right now, and the protesters have a really good reason to be jubilant.
Gotcha. Okay.
Do you have any questions? Any comments?
Um, no, no. I mean, I think I understand so far. Yeah.
Okay, dope. So that's about everything I would really need to say on Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? What do you think like foreign involvement should be when it comes to like the Hong Kong protests? Like I
I
know, for
would
instance,
say
like we've seen a lot of like pictures and whatnot of like people holding up signs saying, I think like help us or like pleading to like America or Great Britain or the United Kingdom or whatever. Should we have any involvement in this at all, or do we like what do you think?
I do think we should have involvement. The only way the protesters are going to succeed is with foreign involvement, because if we just treat this like a domestic
Mm-hmm.
issue and like this is just in Chinese internal affairs, we don't need to take part, then they'll just treat it like, oh, nobody's watching. Let's just do what we can do to get rid of this quick.
So, in terms of this, because this is a question of sovereignty to some extent. That seems like a
Hmm.
really dicey position to take. Like, say for instance, or everything that's happened recently, say with Puerto Rico, right? So let's say Puerto Rico decided that they wanted to like protest a lot, and they were saying, you know what, fuck this, we want to be an autonomous nation or whatever, and say like Russia were to like start sending troops to that area, we would see that as like a pretty big affront. To
Well,
sovereignty. Do you
I
think
was
it's not
sending
similar?
troops.
Mhm.
I don't think we should send troops. I think there's a lot of other ways you can apply pressure with troops. Definitely. For
Mhm.
instance, I'm a big fan of using international trade agreements to like apply pressures to.
Yeah, which nobody likes at the moment. Literally everybody seems to
Yeah,
fucking hate international trade agreements, and it's so fucking frustrating.
I'm a huge Bernie fan, but I disagree with him like
Yeah.
wholeheartedly on that issue. I'm gonna get a lot of hate from a lot of my friends for saying that today, but I'm fine with that.
Yeah, all of the international pressure that people seem to want to apply could have come so well off the back of like, especially the TPP. Holy shit! But people hate it so much. Not to say that it was perfect, but um, I guess so. Like, it seems like okay. So troops on the ground. That's obviously like a fucking nuclear option, like insane levels. But like even
Yeah, I
like
mean, literally
any type
nuclear.
of support other than like a strongly worded tweet. Like, what could we realistically do to support anybody in Hong Kong that wouldn't severely
I
undermine
can tell you what
China's
we have
hegemony?
done so far.
Yeah, go for it.
So for one thing, we don't sell like to China in ways where like we don't sell them like tear gas or like weapons that it could be used by the police to like oppress protesters. That's a very simple one.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we're also like doing a sanction not on Hong Kong but on people who are involved in the oppression of Hong Kong protesters,
Mm-hmm.
which is like very laser focused. But I have a dicey relationship with tariffs. There's another thing that was just passed, which is like the Hong Kong Democracy Act. I'm trying to remember if this one was specifically the one that basically said,
Bonus meme
or it was
getting over it.
there was two acts, so I'm trying not to mix them up. But one of them was the idea that, well, if you're saying central government that Hong Kong is basically China and you're just throwing out the one country two system things, then we should apply the tariffs that we're applying to you right now, the same amount that we're applying to them, because they're the same thing as you, right? Which would be a big issue for China, considering that Hong Kong's like a really big center for trade. So it's kind of like using their. I find it very funny personally.
I've heard, and I don't know the specific numbers, but I've heard that Hong Kong isn't actually as hyper relevant to China anymore, as China has like grown and expanded. That like,
Yeah, not
yeah,
not nearly as much.
uh huh,
Not nearly as much, but it's still like a big factor considering that right now investors are having like a lot of like doubts about Chinese growth. Definitely since they've usually like kind of scuttled growth factors and like GDP numbers for a long time now. So then you have this Hong Kong thing going on in the first place, and Hong Kong's having a problem with growth, and then you have tariffs to Hong Kong, which is kind of seen around the world as like a center for trade.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, and then China has all these other economic problems, and there's the shadow economy and all the debt, and it's just another economic problem they don't want to add on.
Realistically, from like through like a geopolitical lens, there's absolutely no way that China would ever lose hold of Hong Kong and allow Hong Kong to be like a strong like U.S. ally, right? Like, wouldn't that be inconceivable?
You like a I can't believe I'm forgetting the country's name.
Israel or where?
No, not it's it's like there's two Chinas. It's Taiwan. Yeah, sorry, I can't believe I forgot Taiwan.
Yeah,
but it's never going to be a Taiwan. Anybody who thinks it's going to be a Taiwan is out of this world. It would take the type of operation. It would that's something you would talk about like maybe 200 years down the line. But I don't even I see that as not. But it's not even the goal of the protesters though.
Yeah,
the protesters don't want independence.
Well, yeah, but like the goal. Maybe I'm being a little cynical, or maybe you disagree. But like I don't think that the U.S. necessarily cares about like the protesters
not at all.
so much as they would be like having a strong ally like right there, like underneath China would be like such an amazing accomplishment for the U.S. So that would be like, I feel like if we were to get involved, that would be our push, right, is to have a strong ally at that point.
Of course, I mean our push is most American politicians see this through the lens of like strategic gains and relative gains. A loss for China is a gain for America. A gain for China is a loss for America, and you can see that a lot in actually our dialogue. Then when people get really scared that like, hey, China's actually grown a lot and their economy's grown, and people get really scared because they're seeing it through the lens of relative gains, which is a foreign policy theory. Actually, I think I wrote my like final on relative gains, but specifically, that's not really necessarily what I care about, or like a lot of my main thing has always been like the human rights. Like I'm just a pussy, but that's my thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of different lenses through which we can view problems or issues in other countries, right? Human rights is definitely one of them. Yeah.
Now, there's sometimes where I do watch it through relative gains, and that's like I watch Syria through try to watch Syria through both lenses because that's where I'm doing my most work right now with Trump's lovely betrayal of the Kurds.
Oh God, yeah. The reason why I think relative gains is I guess like I like to have, I think it's good to be able to analyze other countries through like lenses that you think are good ways to do it. But I think it's good to be able to take on or to look at things through different paradigms when you're trying to understand other people's actions. So for instance, like the U.S., I'm so uneducated in this realm, guys. So just from my understanding, it seems like the U.S. operates in the world of relative gains and very much not on the realm of like human rights, because most of our foreign policy actions can usually be explained in terms of geopolitical interests around like China and Russia, as opposed to we're just trying to help people. That seems to be the case.
When I talked to one of the senators I work for was a former like ambassador to Romania. Like this was like just like right after post-communist Romania, like right after dealing with like the fallout. And what I've learned from like reading his work and from talking with other officials is that what they believe is that relative gains is the lens we're looking at the world, but a relative gain for America is a relative gain for freedom around the world. That's the lens they look at it through.
Sure.
And therefore, if China makes a gain, if Russia makes a gain, that's not only a gain for them, but that's a loss for us and a loss for freedom and democracy and peace and stability around the world. Now, personally, I think China and Russia is a pretty low bar to set, and we should try to, and I think the better we interact with the world through the diplomatic means and like interacting with international organizations, the better we'll be seen and the better outcomes we'll get, because I don't really believe in unilateral actors. Definitely when you can have people like Donald Trump elected. And also it gains resentment across the population. Like a lot of Americans are now isolationist because of some foreign policy decisions that some people would, clarify as disastrous.
Yeah, the isolationist shit is very fucking frustrating, especially because it's pushed by a lot of the populist left as well now, it seems too. I guess the reason why I brought up the human rights thing is because I know there's shit going on like in Sudan. I know there's stuff going on in like the Central African Republic. But like,
Sudan. I interviewed two Sudanese activists about that actually.
But it seems like the U.S. doesn't really care about these issues.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, because there's no like geopolitical interest there, even though there is a human rights interest there. Like people say there are like ongoing genocides in these regions. But
the Sudanese one was really interesting because the protesters were like, and everybody was asking for America to like be like a negotiator there. And I remember like there was a special envoy, and basically what the response I remember, I think I'm trying to remember it clearly. The response to basically was like, we'll get around to it.
Sure.
it was, and this is somewhere where there was a general strike going on. Bodies were being dumped in rivers. There
Hmm.
was rape was being used as a weapon of war and oppression, and it was the fall of a long-standing dictator. I mean, this was supposed to be like, yo, freedom, democracy. This is where you step in, but there's not like any really gain, and not to mention, the Saudi Arabian government actually had like some deals with the former government, so
Hmm.
then that it would actually somewhat work against their interest to do something in that scenario.
Yeah. Um, Myanmar and Burma too. Yeah. Um, okay, so in terms of U.S. involvement, well, okay, well, actually, well, now I'm curious because he seems like you know a lot about this stuff, way more than I do. It feels like this is like a general feeling that I have. It feels like when it comes to like expanding your empire, I use that in quotes. So we say like economic influence or like diplomatic influence over the world. It seems like China has made really good strides in doing that. I think earlier you mentioned like the Belt and Road Initiative, like them like controlling ports all over the world now because of the kind of like the schemy ways that they set those up in other countries. It feels like China is like looking outward a lot in terms of expanding its presence, but it feels like a lot of the Western world has kind of like began to look in that protectionist policies, quote unquote anti-imperialist policies, like tariffs and trade wars, that everybody's kind of getting scared in the West and like is buckling down and being more isolationist. Do you think that's like a general trend that the world seems to be going through right now, or?
I would say that China's foreign policy, like China's expansion and America's expansion around the world,
Mm-hmm.
happened in two completely different ways.
Uh-huh.
While America's expansion was economic, a lot of it was military as well. The
Sure.
idea that World War II just happened, we need to send our guns and weapons and planes around the world and our troops around the world as protection. China never really did that. Their main thing has been soft power, while
Yeah.
we are, or what you would consider, an empire of hard power. So it's a lot harder for us to confront anybody with soft power, considering that all of our like interests are like reserved in hard power.
Okay.
So the type of empires that's being built are like staunchly different. So it's very difficult for America to confront them. Like the idea of it's like theft of, I forget, it's like theft of ideas or something. Forget the exact term for it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Wouldn't America's like economic presence give us some sort of soft power though, in terms of like the like for instance, when other countries like liberalize their trade and whatnot, it allows America to like get its hands like in those countries in an economic sense, and then that gives us
true.
some influence over those other countries as well.
But a lot of those are just like trade agreement. Where China's doing these like really bold, like the Belt and Road Initiative. We don't really have those types of like programs like coming out like
Yeah.
like into the world, like offering it. It's like this thing on a silver platter where we can like, hey, want to increase trade a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like look at their investment in Africa as an example. Well, I would see a lot of it as exploitative and like debt gouging and stuff like that.
It's
There's
really
not
good for
really.
China though, right?
It's amazingly good for
Yeah.
China. It's really good for China and good for Chinese workers, considering the fact
They're
that
the
they're
ones that
importing
have to
Chinese.
work on the projects. China. Yeah.
Exactly. Which when I was talking to like a man from Uganda who was like telling me how he like lost his job when like a Chinese company came and bought it up, and he was supposed to be working there, and
Mm-hmm.
nope, bye-bye, goodbye. And then like I was talking like, yeah, then we rioted because everything was shit.
Mm-hmm.
So
It frustrates me that like China does a lot of stuff that where I think in today's age, I don't know if the UK would say this. I'm more familiar with them because of Brexit, so I follow them a little more closely than the other European countries. But I know for sure in the US, if the US were to start like a Belt and Road initiative, I think it would be seen as weak. We'd be seen as wasting money in other countries, as not taking care of Americans, that like we would make fun of US leaders for doing it. But like China is able to do it, and it seems like so incredibly beneficial for them. And then as you pointed out, like all the investments in like the cross education they do with students across Africa and everything. It's really frustrating for me to see. It feels like China's taking a lot of like really good moves in terms of like exerting its presence over the world. And the US is like continually throwing it all away. That's very frustrating for me.
yeah, I would say that a lot of that is due to the fact that America is the unilateral actor. So if it takes a small shift in either direction,
mm-hmm.
like it'll kind of bring everybody down with them, right? And that's why everybody's really scared of Trump.
Sure, but I mean that's already started to happen, right? Like we withdrew from the
Yeah,
Iran
yeah,
agreement.
most
Like
definitely.
we're tariffing the fuck out of even our allies. Other people like Merkel have said things like the U.S. is not reliable. Like, yeah, it seems like that's kind of what's already begun, or that path has already started.
I would say a good example of something we could do is we have a lot of work we do in South America. If we were to deal with the economic issues or like development in South America, not only would that help us by, the better they're doing, the more people that'll buy our products and other things and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa, but also help deal with the horrible like drug war, which has been, just destroying people in our country and as well as South America. I think developing South America and having some type of initiative, development initiative would be extremely productive for the region.
Yeah. but we don't do those things anymore. We're like hyper focused on like the American worker and shit. Like it seems like we're back in the era of do you remember freedom fries after 9/11? I don't know how old you are.
I'm 18.
Wait, oh, holy shit, you're 18? Oh, fuck.
I'm the youngest foreign policy advisor in U.S. history.
Oh, geez. Okay. Damn, I had no idea that you were 18. That's insane.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Holy shit. Oh, okay. Well, then you wouldn't remember then. But yeah, after 9/11, I remember that like American stuff, like I think a gas station chain started called Terror-Free Oil, and then we renamed French fries to Freedom Fries for a little bit because we hated France for opposing any foreign policy initiatives we wanted to take with Iraq and shit. But yeah.
Yeah, it's culture. I mean, you can see. I mean, there's a lot of similar stuff actually happening in China right now. Have you ever watched like a Chinese movie, like a Chinese patriotic movie or any of that stuff?
No,
It's really insane watching it. It's the most like cringy type. It's like something you would expect like PragerU or like Steven Crowder to produce. It's like this overly American, like, well, or in this case, overly like pro CCP stuff. The type of they have a lot of that actually going on in China right now because there's a huge feeling in China of like economic decline because or economic like stagnation because well, that's what's actually happening there. They've lost that the idea of being the if you start to develop a middle class, then you don't have the same amount of people to be like that manpower pool who are like producing these products around the world, and they're having a real problem with that. So they're trying to fill the gap with like over the top patriotism.
Yeah. And then to be fair, America's done a lot of that as well, like the cringy, like that sniper.
Oh,
movie
of
and
course.
Shit, like,
watch any football game.
Or that, yeah. Oh god. It feels like for a lot of the left leaning. So populism seems really big in the U.S. right now. It was really big in 2016. It feels like Bernie is definitely a populist candidate. Warren feels like it, even if she's not as much. It feels like that kind of like isolationist view, especially in the wake of Brexit and everything, is going to be like a big trend around the Western world. Do you think, or do you think that's going to change, or do you disagree that there's kind of like this isolationist trend right now, or what?
I would say that it really depends on like who you're going for. Like for instance, I was actually the Mike Gravel. You know Mike Gravel?
No.
Mike Gravel ran for president this time.
Mike Gravel. Sorry, yeah, I do. Wait, have you emailed me before about this?
I was the state director for Mike Gravel.
Oh, okay. I remember getting an email from. Oh God, I don't remember this. The Mike Gravel teens. Were you one of them?
I was maybe not one of those. There's like two main teens, and then we're a bunch of like surrogate teens. I was a surrogate teen.
Okay,
so I was
gotcha.
the state director in Maryland. I managed a campaign in Maryland.
Okay, gotcha. And, I remember getting emails from them a long time ago about that, but yeah, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
And there's like a huge debate, and like the kind of like Kyle Kalinske types are like, we've been doing all this horrible stuff around the world. We need to like recede back. We need to like just kind of close ourselves. So I have a lot of disagreements with him on like foreign policy, but there is a significant part of like I'm just talking about the left here. If we're talking about the right, it's all like isolationists or like hardcore, like let's go to Iran, like let's go to war with Iran. So I can't even really entertain that.
Sure.
But when it comes to like the left wing debate, when it comes to like populism, there's like I would say the thing that's winning out is the idea of like the Dick Cheney type view of foreign policy of everything we've done in the last like 20 years has been horrible. It's really bad. We need to like bring ourselves back, destroy our empire, and be done with the world. The problem is, of course, who's going to take over is going to be China and Russia.
And Russia, yeah.
So I would say that now I would like to raise the standard of how we like treat the world and interact with it. But I think we need to take like a globalist, or if we're talking lefty, internationalist worldview, and look at the world through the idea of like let's cooperate with it, let's work with international organizations, let's abide by UN human rights standards. The problem with getting that through is number one, you're gonna have to convince people who are very distrustful of U.S. foreign policy to actually like get on board with that on the left, and number two, you're gonna have to apply UN standards like unilaterally, including some stuff with Israel, which is going to get you in a lot of trouble with certain very powerful people.
Sure.
So I would say that it is a legitimate problem, but I think it's one that the leading candidates, I think the amount of isolationists they are is sometimes overblown.
You really think so? It feels like when I listen to like, especially Bernie talk, I get like, and maybe I just haven't, because he doesn't talk about foreign policy that much, but I get like big like quote unquote anti-interventionalism vibes, which is like this idea that like the U.S. should just be involved in nothing and all of it is evil and everything America's done for empires overseas has been all evil and evil and evil and that's it.
Well, there's a lot of, I think that's because a lot of those statements are the more fiery ones, like the Iraq War. I stood against it. Like, okay, Bernie, good call. I stood against this, I stood against that, because a lot of the big like things that he stood against were like, wars that we got involved in that sometimes were mismanaged and caused some pretty bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there is actually a lot of talk for him about like building international coalitions. Now that's very vague,
Yeah.
of course, so it's not going to get as much of attention. But I do think he's like genuine about that. I do think Bernie would actually go in there and like be like a diplomatic about like issues like concerning Israel Palestine, which I do believe he has probably one of the best positions on that when it comes to an American politician,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to bring that a little leftward. So when it comes to Warren, I'm a little bit more. I don't really. She doesn't really have a big interest in foreign policy from everything that I've like tried to study of her. And when she does like step into foreign policy, it's almost always been like a face plant. Like in 2014, I remember there was Israel did some bombing in Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
and it went really bad. And her statement was Israel has a right to defend itself, which is a really bad statement to make after Israel goes ham. And Pete Buttigieg actually recently made a similar statement after some bombings in Israel. Which I could go into if you wanted to.
Oh, really? Fuck. Buttigieg, I've seen some Buttigieg and Tulsi exchanges where I felt like, and I haven't looked at his foreign policy a lot, I felt like Buttigieg was one of the only people that had like a somewhat nuanced view of foreign policy that was refreshing. But maybe he said other really dumb shit that I've missed or whatever.
I think the thing is the standard's so low because foreign policy isn't really like a thing everybody has a big interest in. Like Andrew Yang, Andrew Yang has one of the worst foreign policies like of anybody I've ever seen step out. Like I remember recently he was talked about. Somebody asked him about Bolivia, and he was like, I believe Congress should be the one who like talks about like foreign wars. Like they should be the people in charge of that. Like that wasn't a question.
Yeah.
We asked about Bolivia, and then recently he was asked about Israel, and he said, I don't see any reason why we need to question our relationship with Israel. So it's just like a bunch of just like kind of like sliding past on that, just hoping like nobody notices.
I didn't want to drop this big spoiler right now because I've been in contact with the Yang campaign, but what they're planning to announce soon is they're actually going to have a worldwide U.S. freedom dividend that's going to solve all these problems, and that's where America sends $1,000 to every citizen on the planet. So, that'll be
all we have to exchange for it is the cutting of all U.S. aid.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Wait. Okay. So for wait. Hold on, because you laughed a little. Hold on, I'm just making sure I didn't hear some crazy. Do you think Tulsi Gabbard is a good candidate?
No.
Okay. I'm just making sure.
So I worked for since I worked for the we actually did a dual endorsement of Tulsi and Bernie. And I was very peeved about that because Tulsi has like helped puffing up Modi's like view during what's going on right now in Kashmir, and it's been very recent with that. She's supposed to be like, I'm the anti-interventionalist, but when Russia does some bombings, it's just anti-terrorism stuff, but when we do, it's bad. Russia. But also that's all really bad and all, but the drone war, we need to continue that actually, and we need to continue the war on terror. I feel like she's more of like the pro-troops candidate than like I have a very like nuanced view on foreign policy candidate. Also the thing that pissed me off the most was recently when we were talking about what's going on in Rojava with the Kurds, which is a very big issue for me. It's probably actually my number one foreign policy issue. And she just was like, well, let's actually talk about the terrorists we funded with like all these other organizations and blah 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 blah. But that wasn't the question. She just pivoted because she couldn't like
to one of her talking points.
It would go against what she believes of like us pulling out to save our troops if we were to talk about keeping the 50 to 150 troops that were in northeastern Syria to stop an ethnic cleansing. So
what about,
I don't.
One of the reasons why I asked this, I'm sorry, I'm going back a little bit, just related to Bernie's foreign policy, because you said it wasn't quite as bad. Like Bernie made references to literally just like pulling everything out of Afghanistan. Do you think that's a good foreign policy initiative, or do you think that would be a disaster? Because my understanding is that like the only reason Afghanistan stands today against like the Taliban owning like Kabul and shit is that the U.S. troops are still there. That's like
it's also like a weird thing because like if we pulled out troops right now, like I'm pretty sure like Kabul would fall. But if we pulled out troops like not too long ago, it probably would have been cool because not perfect, but it would have been a lot better considering the fact that they actually regained and now have more territory than ever than when we were actually in there. My main thing is we need to negotiate with the Taliban, and anybody saying we don't need to negotiate with the Taliban is actively wants to stay there forever, right? I would love if Bernie was to say out loud, we need to negotiate with the Taliban. It's just not a very popular thing.
Oh,
to
he did. He
say out
actually
loud.
did.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh,
I was
that?
shocked.
Oh.
Yeah, he actually said that on the last
Well, then
debate.
that's the wokest take he could
Yeah.
possibly have. Then yeah, I would say he's like way above like anybody else on saying that. Like, yes, we need to negotiate with the Taliban.
Gotcha.
Because people actually went after Trump for that, and that's why he actually stopped doing that one. And because I think it was like the 4th of July, and it would have been bad to like negotiate with the Taliban on U.S. soil on the 4th of July for very America reasons. So I think that's actually a really good take, and I didn't know that about him. Oh my god, another reason to love him.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. What else?
The other thing was Bolivia, or you want to ask me about any more candidates?
Hit me
I
up
mean,
on
John
your
Delaney's.
Oh wait,
John
what about
Delaney's been making a run. You wanna ask me about John Delaney?
I don't think Delaney's ever said anything I disagreed with, but that guy is one of them. That guy's less electable than Amy or not Gorbachev, Klobuchar, or whatever the fuck her name is.
John Delaney's the hardline Marxist, right?
No, what? John Delaney is like,
I'm
fuck
kidding.
you. Okay, yeah, fuck you. Is like the neoliberal candidate or whatever, depending on how you define it.
Yeah, I know. He's actually from my state. He barely beat a Republican in a pretty decent like district. He should have been good. He's really bad at running elections.
Nice.
This is why he's also doing really bad right now.
Wait, are you telling me that pictures of him working out in various gyms isn't helping to boost his numbers right now?
Yo, honestly, when he jumped on that table, I felt like he was gonna take my girl. You know what I mean?
Maybe. Oh, maybe he's too aggressive. He needs to turn it back a little bit. Okay. Bolivia. Hit me up. Was it a coup?
Was it a coup? I would say that while that term doesn't really matter to me, I personally call it a coup. I do it because of the violence that I'm trying to remember. Is it followed or preceded? Followed. Yes.
Preceded. Doesn't normally violence precede a coup? Like you violently overthrow the government?
I would say that there doesn't need to be like initial violence for a coup to happen. Like for instance, if while I would not make this comparable at all, anybody saying it's a CIA coup, by the way, they're wrong. There's no real evidence of that. If there is evidence in the future, then I guess it could be. But I saw you had like a long debate with Rem about that. I just want to expel that right now. There is no evidence that the CIA was involved with this. If anybody wants to present me with evidence, I would love to be the person who brought that to light, and I would love to be that person. But there's none of that. So I just wanted to spell that right now. There's no CIA involvement at this point in time. There could be in the future. Stuff like that usually comes out like 15, 20 years later. Who knows? I actually used it at the campaign I worked for. We actually used it as a point to talk about banana republics in South America and how we need to change our relationship with South America. But other than that, you shouldn't use the idea of CIA coups for anything more than that in this discussion. But when it comes to it being a coup, it was the thing that makes me feel like it was very coup-y, and I can't like hardline call it a coup for the reason of like
Sure.
There was a interim presidency and they're bringing back democracy and all of that stuff. It was election irregularities. All three parties kind of agreed on like having a second election. Maduro, the opposition, protests wanted a second, like everybody involved wanted. Even the OAS report even called for a second election with the new electoral authorities, which would have meant like changing the electoral body that does all this stuff. And then the military kind of was like, okay, now let's step down. And that made me, when that initially happened, like I was actually 2 hours before that happened, I was actually kind of celebrating. It was like, okay, we're going to actually have a peaceful resolution of this. I don't like that he's running for a fourth term, but I'd rather have this happen than like the police have to start shooting people, because I know if he's removed, that's what's going to happen. And then he was pressured. Now, the thing about him being pressured and like the government actually rolling up on him, like doing a drive-by and like saying goodbye, right? Like, is that if the military was to step up right now in America and say, okay, Trump, could you please leave? Now, any other president probably would for like common sense. Trump, maybe not. Maybe.
Sure.
But,
I guess to be clear, so there's two things I want to make very clear. One, it wasn't only the military that quote unquote kindly asked him.
Of course not.
Right? Yeah, there were other
Of
like
course, it was protesters.
Yeah, and the unions. I think the largest union in the country, like they're literally like a lot of people were.
Yeah, the miners' union. That has to do with a lot of it's really complicated. I can't get into it, but yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing, I guess like the reason why I shy away personally from calling it a coup at this point is because I feel like the connotation, and this just might be my ignorance. My personal feeling is the connotation of a coup is you are literally a regime change. Like a coup isn't just like the next leader steps up or you follow the similar process that was already in the country, but you're like literally installing like a whole new government. And ideally, now I guess we don't 100% know what's going to happen, but hopefully like new elections. I think they've already declared for new elections. Like dates have been set up and everything.
Yeah.
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 So hopefully those elections are going to happen, in which case it feels kind of weird to say that like somebody resigned, so it's a coup.
I would say that is because when you say coup, a lot of things, a lot of people like imply a lot of stuff like what happened. Like if I said there was a coup in South Africa, right? You'd think, oh, so what happened? Did the military step in? Who died? Like what happened, right? But I feel like that's a lot of the same terminology with the word concentration camp, which has had a lot of debate recently. But when someone says concentration camp, a lot of people immediately think, okay, so they're killing all these people, they're doing that.
Genocide. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, while you could definitely call what's happening in China right now cultural genocide, it's not the death camp type model. But I still call them concentration camps to like imply the severity of the situation, and because it's like accurate. And when I call it a coup in Bolivia, it's kind of like the same thing for me, where it's not this usual like version of what we would consider a coup, and maybe this should only be used in like foreign policy circles when we call it a coup, and not for like because people, I don't want people to jump the gun, but I still use it in that for the same context and same reason.
Gotcha. Okay, and that's actually my exact reason for not using it, I guess. Maybe it's just the type of people we talk to, but like when I hear somebody say that like Bolivia is a coup, that's immediately followed up with in 5 years you're going to be reading how the CIA was behind it. Like that's
I think saying CIA coup and coup, I think if we're responsible, we can explain to our audience the difference between like the America stepping in, like getting Pinochet, taking his corpse out and throwing it at Bolivia.
Yeah.
No. And just like, nah, like the military like did something that was probably not the best thing to do considering the situation and what the OAS report recommended and election liability, right? And definitely the violence that followed, and considering who was the interim president, I think like if we could redo it over again, I would have not went the way this went at all.
Sure.
Because Anez is a really like bad character, like a really, really bad character.
For sure. Although I mean she was theoretically the next in line, right?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, like, if we were to go down like this logically, like, I mean, what's his name? The guy who, like, said like rape and instances of incest should still be. I'm trying to think of the American politician. He's like this far right, like openly white nationalist dude. You know what I'm talking about?
Not the white, not the guy from Iowa, right? The state.
I think I'm talking about the guy from Iowa.
Is it Steve King? Not that guy, right?
Steve King, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like if we went down the line eventually and got down to Steve King, like he might be the next line in this session, but let's be logical about what's the better scenario here. You know what I mean?
Well, sure, but there's a difference between like who would I personally prefer versus like what's like the process, right? Like I would prefer like in some instances to have an electoral college and then in some instances not like after the last election, but that's not necessarily like a democratic thing, right?
I understand that, but this is also somebody who's like, you know, going against like UN standards when it comes to like use of force and like for lifting of restrictions. The Human Rights Watch recently came out with a report that was very condemning about her actions and calling political opponents and journalists seditious and terrorists, which I know you value a lot, like journalistic freedom, because the president has gone after it a lot. She has tried to do similar actions, definitely with her security. I forget his officer or administrator, who has gone like after people like relentlessly.
Sure.
So I'm very scared because, and then there's also the idea that I believe, and I'm trying to remember this correctly, but the interim government is supposed to be in power for 3 months, and their main thing is to keep the peace. So if you pass laws that are intended to keep the peace, that makes sense. You need to look at them like with a lot of scrutiny. We need to make sure that that's their intention. It's not 3 months. It's like, I believe it was like September of next year, which I think a lot of it might be because she's a party with 4%. The odds of her winning an election are quite low. So she wants to make sure she can have as much impact in the shortest amount of time possible. So she need to extend that barrier. And the fact that she's done some foreign policy decisions that really while are legal, fall under outside of the implied idea of being an interim president.
Being an interim president, sure.
Yeah, which all that like, if there was a slow slide into like authoritarianism,
this would be like the first ramp. Yeah,
she's checking off every single box. Definitely with her. Then you need to take into account like her racist past with like calling like indigenous people satanic and like ties to Camacho, and like it's just bad stuff. So I if I was to redo this, even though I disagree with the idea of Bolivia running for a fourth, I mean in even a third term, if we were going to be like honest here,
Morales, right?
Yeah, Morales. Sorry. Mix up names all the time.
No, it's okay.
She to me is almost a bigger threat. Definitely from someone who she was actively like lifting restrictions to shoot protesters on the street, And if you, I mean, let's compare like the amount of time it took for her to actually kill people on the street compared to like communist China in Hong Kong.
To be clear on these, okay, just to make sure that things aren't being like too exaggerated, like the recent clash of protesters that was reported on wasn't just like the military running out to the street and killing people, right? It was like protesters were trying to like overcome, like it was like a military blockade into like a power plant or something, right? Wasn't it like, it wasn't literally just like the military like bloodthirsty?
Well, yeah, they weren't like knocking down into the homes of the grandmas,
Yeah.
brains out something. But I mean, it's still like the idea of the human standard of the use of force and using restraint is very, very clear when interacting with protesters. This has been thrown away in places like Iraq, Chile,
The United States. Sorry, I'm just kidding. But no, I know what you mean.
I mean, you got to like compare like American blockades and recently in Hong Kong, there was a blockade at a university for a very long time, and they were able to basically take over the majority of the university now with nobody dead. And these were like simple street blockades that were set up with not nearly the amount of skill and like the amount of fortress that was at that Hong Kong university, and about 33 people are dead and over 800 casualties. Like that's very scary.
Fuck, I'm very hesitant because I can't read primary sources because I can't fucking read Spanish.
Actually, can I give you something quick on this?
Yeah,
Human Rights Watch actually released like something on this.
Were protesters actually like literally napalming or like firebombing like some of these facilities in order to get in? Like I heard that they were actually using like explosives or like improvised explosives.
Talking about Hong Kong?
No. In Bolivia.
Well, the thing is, I don't know about that, but I know that those were used also in Hong Kong, and the police still haven't killed anybody. Well, there is one instance where a protester might have died due to police interfering with ambulance, but that's unproven.
Sure.
So I'm not really going to talk about that.
Sure. Do you think that Morales was wrong in? Or I'm sorry, wait. You had a Human Rights Watch thing you wanted to read. Do you want to read this?
Yeah, I was just second. I'm having trouble trying to find it because the thing about the Human Rights Watch report is initially they were very like supportive of the like the removal of Morales. Then I was like, you do know what could happen after this? And then like 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, they were like, this is horrible. We need what is she doing? She's like throwing away UN standards. And I was like, okay, yeah, but did we not all see this coming?
Do you think Morales was wrong when he tried to run for fourth term after a referendum?
Oh, most definitely. He shouldn't have run. The funny thing about this. Now, this I like to piss off everybody by saying this and remind everybody of this, that the constitution, like the constitutional court that ruled that he could run a fourth term also ruled that Anez was actually now the rightful president, which I find kind of funny. Because then it's like, okay, was the court controlled by?
Well, there's a lot of shit like that, right? Like, for instance, like people people declared like the OAS was like an American-backed institution that was actually all their shit was fabricated. But the OAS also supported, I think, the courts as well when they overturned that constitutional thing, right?
Yeah, they actually use an OAS like thing to like actually say, yeah, we should get rid of it. So it's,
but people are very quick to say like, well, this is a biased bullshit. But like people do the same with Comey in the United States, right? Oh, Comey is like a Democrat hack or whatever, ignoring the fact that, well, he probably cost Hillary the election and he's been a Republican his whole life, and like this is a very strange accusation to make. You notice that people do shit like that like really often. As soon as somebody does something they disagree with, like, oh, well, this guy is, illegitimate, a hacker or something.
Now, of course, like the OAS is not a perfect organization. I mean, they were started with like during the Cold War, and there might be like some residue, but that doesn't mean we like throw out the report. I mean, like the main problem I had with the OAS report was that it didn't really like show any like graphs or figures or anything or any of that like, central data. That makes it so it's very easy. And the Center for Economic Policy Research did this. In fact, like it didn't show us any data though. And I mean, that's like a legitimate criticism. Like if you're about to do something that could affect a lot.
Yeah, they know that they must have been aware that this report is going to have a dramatic outcome. So it is pretty suspect. Why wouldn't they release more specifics relating to that?
And that's why I was actually on another person's stream, someone you're great friends with, Alabro, and
oh god, yeah, go ahead.
And I said like, at this point there's no concrete evidence because they didn't release any of the data. I want to see it. Please release it. I remember at one point you even said with the REM thing, like you just sent an email to them, and I was like, oh, actually, let me do that, and I did, and then they just never got back to me.
What could possibly be like what would be like a rationale for them not releasing it?
I mean, maybe they don't want to show like their processes. I mean, I'm not like an election expert, right? I do foreign policy, which of course includes elections. But I mean, in that you could use that to like cover all areas of society.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But so I just don't know. I mean, they should have known that what this could cause, and if we just saw the numbers, then this could have gone a totally different way with so much less violence. Let's say they didn't have the numbers, then the OAS report would have never really come out, and it would have just said, okay, everything was cool, and then same thing, so so much less violence, and
Mhm.
the whole thing really avoided. So my main concern is the people who are dead at this moment, and how it was completely avoidable if we just like did what the OAS report originally recommended with the second election, what the opposition originally called for was another election,
Mhm.
or Morales eventually called for was another election. I think this whole process of like the military stepping in really just really threw everything under the bus.
Mhm. What else?
I mean, do you want to talk about this last guy you were on with? He was something else, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Talking
but I
about
don't follow any of
foreign
the
policy.
impeachment shit. I like to wait till the dust settles
No,
and
no,
all
I
that
don't. It's not
because
impeachment. It's not.
yeah.
It's foreign policy. Foreign policy.
Uh-huh.
He was talking about like
Oh, the Ukraine interference in the election and everything, right?
I was going to talk about Syria quick because he was talking about but Trump's he's withdrawing, trying to get our troops out and all this other stuff.
Oh,
And I
after
think
trying to
Syria is a
take
great
over like the
example.
Syrian oil fields or whatever.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is brilliant. So Trump so the Kurds, they defeated ISIS, really really progressive for the region, really good great guys. We've backstabbed them multiple times in history. This is a group who through all of that have been loyal to us and have done really great work with us. And out of all the regions in the Syrian civil war, the YPG and the SDF are probably, they're not perfect, but they're like the best faction. Like if you were to like talk about like the actual like moderate opposition,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of them use that to cover like some really shady groups. They are that. These
Sure.
are like, in fact, they're progressive, like with how they treat women and other stuff like that.
Okay.
Definitely for the region. So what Trump did was originally the government like said they were going to pull out like a year ago, and everybody hated it and told him not to. Eventually, he went back on it. And then before this, they were trying to like appease Turkey, so they came to an agreement that there would be a 10-mile or like 20. I'm trying to remember, but it was like a very large distance where they would demilitarize the border with Turkey because Turkey wants to intervene and like crush the Kurds.
Yeah.
Because of internal conflicts with
Does
other Kurds.
yeah wait so does Turkey view the YPG the same way they view the PKK, or do they view these as two distinct groups?
This is really interesting because they see them as an offshoot of the PKK.
Okay.
Right. And the reason they see that is because the PKK was allowed in Syria because Assad had like some conflicts with like Turkey and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually was banned. And then years later, there was the PYD, which was like a political group formed in it. And they said like a lot of the same people who were in the PKK was in the PYD.
Okay.
Therefore, the PYD who made the YPG later.
It's basically an offshoot. Okay.
Yeah,
am I correct in assuming that like when Turkey steps into like Syria a little bit, that Turkey's main goal here is to literally just fuck with the Kurds?
Most definitely.
Okay.
Like it's really to do, and they don't have a great relationship with Assad.
Of course,
but
sure.
but all of Turkey's claims are just completely boundless. Like the idea that they're going to fight terrorism while using former ISIS fighters and jihadi groups to do so, and letting ISIS fighters escape, or the idea that
Turkey doesn't really give much a fuck about ISIS, do they?
No. They let ISIS go through their borders.
Yeah,
they
because Turkey was one of the big purchasers of oils when ISIS was running all of the oil. They were Turkey fucking tankers that were driving back and forth. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Exactly. Don't say it too loud, or the Twitter trolls will come out. But
Sure, yeah, okay.
I get a lot of hate from them. But so Turkey was like, if anything, the new leader of ISIS. I mean, honestly, at this point, could just be Erdogan. He might be next in the secession. So when it comes to that, like obviously, like their claims are boundless, but they are a NATO member and they're very strategically important when going against Russia,
sure,
and like other areas.
So
NATO is kind of like
U.S. ally in that fucking region, the Gulf states and Turkey and Israel. Yeah,
exactly. Put up with any human rights abuse because
yep,
strategic
or
gains.
Saddam Hussein. Yeah.
Which of course I'm pretty sure that I don't need to get into that philosophy, but anyway, so there was the agreement made that they would demilitarize for a certain zone, basically, destroy trenches, get rid of heavy machinery, get rid of light guns, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And right when they finished doing that, right when they destroyed all the defenses, is right when Trump caved into Erdogan and said you can go in and invade, basically.
Gotcha.
So basically, they told the Kurds to disarm themselves and said, okay, now you're good for ethnic cleansing.
Gotcha.
And Trump, this was an instance where a lot of foreign policy decisions go through so many filters before a decision is made.
Mm-hmm.
This was something Trump did on his own. This was
Twitter.
his big boy. This is his big boy pants move where he did it at the middle of the night, and I had to stay up till like 6 a.m. trying to figure out what to do because I was panicking. And I was woken up by like phone calls from like angry staffers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a disaster. Former ISIS fighters, jihadi fighters have been pushed in. Multiple war crimes have been committed with female politicians being dragged out of their cars and shot. The killing of like prisoners of war, bombing hospitals during ceasefires. At that point, you're stacking war crimes. It's just really really bad stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and all of it was completely avoidable by Trump. But then his main argument was, well, we need. I'm so sick of our troops dying. I love our troops so much. I love them bigly.
Uh-huh.
So I'm gonna bring them all home. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be wonderful. Did I say home? What I meant was Iraq. Iraq, Iraq's basically America, right? Oh, when I meant Iraq, what I meant is they're going back into Syria to protect oil fields.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Kurds want protection, and this is a direct quote, they should just move to the oil-rich regions. So that and that Turkey needs to. This is an actual quote, and this is while ethnic cleansing is going on.
Mhm.
Turkey needs to clean out the area.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking for ethnic cleansing.
So it's been a long time since I looked at geography. This is like a total this is like the opposite end of the country, right? Like the Kurdish people, aren't they generally like the northwestern parts, and those oil fields are like in the northeastern parts, or?
They're in the northeastern parts, so they would actually have to go down south to get to the oil fields.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What so? What? Okay, I don't know anything about this. The oil field shit. I haven't like read much on that at all. Why is the U.S. over those oil fields? Why? What the fuck?
Because Trump liked oil, and that was the only way. This is really funny. So all like the Republicans actually had to go to Trump multiple times with maps of Syria that just had big like oil like barrels on important areas to actually convince him that we need to be there. So they had to like say oil in region, stay good, like in 3 separate meetings before he said, "Oh, oil good."
Who's running like those refineries and everything right now though? Who runs those oil fields?
I don't know. I have no clue. But all I know is that Trump's main concern at the moment was just the oil and not the. And the thing is, my main concern, of course, was the humanitarianism and the idea that Kurds deserve an autonomous region within Syria, similar to Iraqi Kurdistan. Their main concern is the strategic interest of fighting Iran, because then they could use Syria to get to Hezbollah and strategic gains. So from any perspective, this was a dumb move. If you're a neocon war hawk, it was dumb because America lost power on the world stage, and specifically Iran actually would gain influence from this. If you're a peace-loving hippie like me, then you would hate it because an ethnic cleansing is taking place, and Turkey is committing multiple war crimes with former ISIS fighters to resettle like Arabs in the regions where Kurds are.
Sure.
So this was just all around a horrible decision.
Just a quick thing in chat. Somebody said the Kurds aren't seen themselves as they displace various Arabs, Assyrians, and Chaldeans. Something that I'm familiar with. I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but I heard that like when the Peshmerga in Iraq were rolling through like all the previously held ISIS villages, that they were just like killing a bunch of people that were like ended up joining ISIS. They were like, fuck you. That basically ISIS rolled through a lot of these villages like, hey, join us, we'll kill you. People are always like, okay, fuck it, we'll join you. And that when the Kurds came back through, they started killing like all of those people. Like, was that true? Did that happen, or do the Kurdish people have
I would say that there's definitely been a problem with like Kurdish like nationalism and like displacement and stuff like that, or crimes of that sort. The Peshmerga isn't really the YPG, but they are Kurdish.
Yeah, of course,
so
yeah.
Same thing. But I would say that there's definitely been issues, but it's just like the idea of like comparing them at all to any other group in like Syria is like, it would be like, for instance, saying like, it would be like comparing like French war crimes against Germans to German war crimes against the French. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And while it's really bad and they shouldn't do that, and they've worked to build like a decent like judicial system to deal with. I mean, for instance, they had like 11 all these ISIS prisoners not dead in these places, and one of the main arguments against invasion was to stop these ISIS prisoners from escaping because they've created this judicial system to try to deal with foreign ISIS fighters that came from Europe and America. I would just make the comparison, of course, like the French to the Nazis.
What is Assad is safe and has been for a couple years at least now, right?
Oh yeah, Assad's one basically.
Yeah, why the fuck are we still on those oil fields? Is it basically just to give them the middle finger, or like what is the goal? Just to fuck with Syria a little bit, or?
The oil. I mean, the thing is, I feel like the oil fields will use this kind of like a bargaining chip with Republicans to convince Trump that we need to stay there. And it's part of it's kind of like what's going on right now with Yemen, right? The idea of, well, we're supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia for jobs, and also because they need to beat the Houthis because the Houthis are supplied by Iran. There's no way Saudi Arabia is going to be able to beat the Houthis. Their military is completely incompetent. They have no idea what they're doing, and every tank they send in there just becomes basically like an open target for anybody in like a 5-mile radius, right? It's the idea of like, well, if we perpetuate the conflict, or if we are able to make a settlement where certain areas that are somewhat friendly to us have a little bit more power, then that would lessen certain countries' like influence in these nations.
Okay. So the U.S. is never extracting oil from Syria, right? That's never going to be able to happen. That would be like a.
Uh,
What do you think?
I mean, like, you mean like a national oil like, we're not gonna like go like Venezuela and make like the National American Oil Company that goes in and like
And
this
like,
isn't
yeah,
the 1800s anymore. Now, would we give contracts to companies to maybe do it? I don't know. I mean,
sure.
I don't know enough about the contracts actually.
Hmm.
There's so much work in foreign policy, I can't cover it all.
Do you agree that the joint plan of action, whatever the fuck it was called, the Iran nuclear deal? Do you agree that that was a good deal, or do you think that it was right to pull out of that?
I'm actually a big fan of nuclear war. We should have it tomorrow, man. It'll be real
Okay.
fun.
All
No,
right, that's
no,
what I
but
thought. I
yeah,
thought that was one of like the most important foreign policy achievements of all time under Obama. That sucked that we just walked out of it, I guess. But
yeah, no, but the Iran deal was great. It was really good. We should have kept it, and Trump is Dumbo.
hmm.
I mean, the concessions we got were honestly unbelievable when you consider the circumstances.
The insight into
Um,
their nuclear program and everything, and all the surveillance agreements and everything
it was just unbelievable, and the
from
main
Iran
hitch,
too. Yeah, sorry, go on.
and Iran, and this was with a progressive type like administrator in Iran
Hmm.
who was basically trying to like juke out the Khomeini at every single like instance to get this, and then after all of that, the main hitch up is we're giving them their own money.
Yeah.
It was just ridiculous. It's just Republicans are war hawks, but then when they get the opportunity to go to war with Iran, they like cowered out of it every single time too. It's really weird because I feel like a lot of it's they want a war with Iran, but they also right when they get the opportunity, like when they shot down our drone which was in their airspace, or when it comes to any of the oil tanker like
Hmm.
mishaps, or when there was like bombings of Saudi oil fields, anytime they get close to it, I feel like they immediately realize like, oh wait, no, this is a horrible idea. But then like right when the situation's over, they're like, dang it, we should have done it, and they just go charging towards it again.
It's almost for sure that Iran was the one behind the those like limpet mines or whatever in the in that strait that was like destroying those ships, right?
Uh,
Or do you
the
disagree
Olympic
with
part,
it? Yeah.
I have no clue. I have actually no clue. The main thing I would actually point to at the moment that's
Hmm.
like the weirdest is that they probably had involvement with the bombing of Saudi oil fields that cut oil production. That was really bold move, and I didn't expect it.
Hmm.
That was the one I think should actually be the thing like people look at the most, because that like cut like, I mean, I don't know like how bad Saudi infrastructure is if you can cut their oil production, which is like their main thing, in half that quickly
Hmm.
with some drones. But that was, I think that's the most important thing we can look at within their aggression.
If we would have followed through on that Iran deal and we would have normalized relations with Iran, which I understand is that's still like there's a lot of challenge to go past that. That would have actually been like an insane step towards like I don't want to say peace in the Middle East, but in terms of like having that
Almost no,
region
no,
be like
it would have been a step towards peace in the Middle East. I mean,
yeah.
that would at least give us a precedent to further like start negotiations about like drawing down like support for certain organizations like
Uh-huh.
Hezbollah, or our support for different orgs.
Yeah, and we could maybe reach an agreement with Palestine after after yeah, drawing back support from Iran. Yeah, fuck, that would
I mean, that's a whole other issue, because Israel is not giving in on that unless everybody's like against them.
sure, of course. But I mean like with Iran as an ally in that region, right? Iran supports Hamas and Hezbollah quite a
Oh
bit,
yeah,
right? Yeah, so I mean like
because Saudi Arabia still isn't like. I mean, recently they've been getting nicer to Israel, but at the end of the day, if like every other middle country in the Middle East is against them,
mm-hmm.
including Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then America's like, hey, you actually need to come to the bargaining table for real this time,
Mm-hmm.
then they wouldn't really have an option. Not to
Sure.
mention the UN already has multiple resolutions against them that have like ruled. I think it was like in 2016 or 2015, like ruled their settlements illegal. So there's not like much they would be able to do in that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fuck. And then it weakens Russia's influence in the region as well and everything. Yeah, fuck. Yeah, that's really shit. Um. Okay. Any other big things you want to talk about?
Nothing
Wait.
else then.
Here's a question. Why did we get rid of Saddam Hussein? I actually don't know the answer to this. Was it literally just because we were so mad after 9/11 that Bush just wanted to fuck some dude up, or like because like I mean obviously we kept him there through the gassing the Kurds. We didn't give a fuck about that shit. Like why did we fuck up
I
Iraq
could
for
talk.
him?
I love that. Actually, Henry, when we were talking about, hey, Kurds revolt, and then they did, and it was like, wait, never mind, wait, we didn't mean it for real. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Kissinger famously said, and Henry Kissinger he's one of the smartest men in history, but he is a monster. Like, he should be put on trial. He said after that happened, and people were like, should we back them up? He said, we work in foreign policy, not as missionaries, and then just let them all killed. He said a similar thing, and he's a Jewish man. When he was talking about oppression of Jews in the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
he was like, it's not in U.S. strategic interest to care.
Sure. Well, true.
He's like,
I mean, that's how the U.S. foreign policy works. So, but okay.
yeah.
So, what from a U.S. interest standpoint, what benefit did we have by tossing Saddam Hussein out?
I mean, it was simply a thing like from the Kuwait War, right? It was basically seen as like an unfinished business. A lot of it had to do with like George Bush wanting to like complete the accomplishment of his father. A lot of it had to be like, hey, we're in a position right now where everybody's like hyped up on 9/11 fever and we can invade. It doesn't have anything to do with 9/11 though. I don't care, invade. And the rest of it was, just basic strategic interests of the idea of like if we move into Iraq and we take that out and replace it with a pro-democracy dude, then we're going to be right next to Iran, who's our big opponent right now, and he's actually not doing like a lot of stuff against Iran at the moment because he's been fighting us in the Kuwait War. And also we can also deal with strategic. I mean, it was a mishmash of multiple issues, but the main thing was also the weapons of mass destruction, which of course was a complete and utter lie. So I mean, I think that it was like a point where America was like, we are like so prepped for war right now, but we have no one to invade, and Iraq was just there. I think a lot of it just is really based on that. There's a lot of strategic stuff to it, but I think the main thing was everybody wanted to invade something, and Iraq was there. I honestly think that was it.
Okay.
And there's not a satisfactory answer, but foreign policy is so gray. And there's not good guys and bad guys. It's so gray.
WMDs were the excuse for regime change. Well, yeah, but Saddam was already faithful to U.S. interests generally, so regime change here doesn't really make sense, I don't think, or it didn't seem to.
I mean, there was the main arguments like made to the U.S. public was like humanitarianism and weapons of mass destruction. I remember there was this one, like I think senator or congresswoman who literally went up on the floor in a burqa and said, "This is why we need to invade."
Yeah. Well, like, but the WMDs, that was always a bullshit. Like everybody and the presidents like knew that was like some bullshit. So it seems like I'm just curious what the alternative motive was, because Saddam was like faithful to U.S. interests. I just don't understand why we wanted him gone so badly. I don't get that.
I mean, was he? I mean, how faithful are you to U.S. interests if you invade Kuwait? Right.
Well, I mean, he was faithful enough that we kept him there after. I mean, what do you mean? I mean, apparently we thought he was.
Well, it's also because George Bush's his father, George Bush, was smarter than him. It was like, if we do this, this is going to destabilize the region. This is a bad idea. Let's not do it.
Yeah.
But then after 9/11, that's a totally different context of almost like we don't care.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And there was generally some people who thought if we invaded, we'd bring democracy and freedom and all that stuff. But, it's all malarkey.
Yeah, of course. It just works so well with other...
Just said malarkey.
Huh. Okay. All right. Well, hey, if you ever... How did you even hear about me or find my stuff or anything? Or do you, like, watch a lot of Twitch or what?
How'd I hear about you? I saw you, like, debating, like, people on YouTube, like, far-right people. And then I was like, oh, okay, let me go on to Twitch. And then I went on to Twitch, and then everybody was like, wow, you're a foreign policy advisor. Talk to me. So now I've been doing kind of like a tour talking about the Syrian conflict.
Gotcha.
And I was like, oh, just come on. Can I shout out my stuff, by the way, since we're about to wrap it up?
Of course. Go for it, dude.
Dope. I would really appreciate it if you guys followed me on Twitter. I'm trying to build that up a little bit, spread some stuff on foreign policy. And I also plan on running for office very, very soon. I'll wait for updates on that. My Twitter is Dylan Burns 1776. That's DYLANBURNS 1776. Again, that's DYLANBURNS 1776. And the other thing is, I'll just shout out a charity. The Red Crescent is an organization that's providing really good medical supplies on the ground for like Kurdish civilians affected by the invasion of Turkey. Really appreciate it if you just guys went there, maybe dropped a few bucks. It'd be really dope.
Oh, I have a question for you. Do you think Maduro needs to go?
No comment. I mean, like, the thing is, like, I would like it if he was no longer in power, but the idea that America needs to, like...
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying, like, America should do it, for sure.
I don't like Maduro. Maduro, a bad boy. He's a bad boy, and he should probably be removed, but the way he's going to be removed probably is scary to me. So, it's gray regions.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for the chat. I appreciate it a lot, buddy.
No problem. You have a wonderful day.
All right. Have a good one, man. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Oh, if you ever hear me argue with somebody or do a YouTube video or whatever, if you ever think I give like a really bad foreign policy take, or if there's something that I'm like completely missing, feel free to like message me or email me or.
I have a bad take you made. If you.
Oh yeah, go for it. Hit me up. Yeah.
You don't play Hoi 4? What's wrong with you?
Hoi 4?
Hoi 4, Hearts of Iron.
No, what the fuck is that?
You don't know Hearts of it's a great it's a grand strategy game where you like manage
Oh, no, I don't
countries
do
and, like,
grand
everything, so.
strategy shit. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
How dare you? How dare
Have you
you?
heard me
Bye-bye.
when in any of my debates where it seems like I'm missing some bigger picture, or I just have like a poor understanding of some foreign policy position that I have or whatever? Do you think? Have you heard?
I think a lot of it has been just when people like say really dumb takes on history. And while I'm not a historian, like I've seen some people like come in with some really bad takes on history, and then you're just kind of there quiet.
I don't know the
But you've been a lot better with that, like when addressing like the Holodomor and like other like stuff in history. So
Okay.
awesome.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks a lot, buddy. I appreciate it.
Have a nice day.
Bye. So I just wanted to talk to you. So like I had this thought about like when a fetus is actually a life, and you know, because it's conscious, right, dude? And then you end up repeating the same things I've heard like a million times.